about to shift from terrestrial habitats and soundscapes into marine soundscapes. And most of us haven't spent a lot of time in the water, so we assume that it's not really filled with sounds, but in fact, it's a very creative place for sound development, especially with the whales and dolphins. And sound is a very important component for animals like whales and dolphins, because when you're in the water, the visible light is really reduced the deeper you get. So by the time you're down a couple hundred feet, it's pretty dark. And also the color drops out. So it's all you can see is at depth is shadows. And then when you get far enough deep, it's totally black. So for an animal to communicate and be aware of its surroundings, sound is a perfect component. And sound has the advantage in the water of traveling 5 times faster in water than on land. And consequently, it also travels 5 times farther underwater than on land. So in thinking about the ocean, which covers 71% of the surface of our planet, it's an area that has a lot of patchy resources. There's areas like when the Humboldt Current is coming up this side of South America, it's bringing up cold nutrients that create all the bloom of phytoplankton, then zooplankton, then larger copepods, crustaceans, krill, that the bigger herrings start to feed on, and then the tuna, dolphins, humpback whales, blue whales. But it's a very patchy system, so a lot of the times the animals are in a search. They're in certain areas at certain times of the year. And in the case of humpback whales, which we saw the spectrogram early in the program, they're animals that migrate between their wintering area, which is in the tropics, where the females raise their calves. They have their calves, they raise them, the males come to the area and try to breed with the females, but they're not eating. They're more concerned with raising calves and mating. And so they end up going to their summer areas, which in the case of the southern hemisphere is down all around the Antarctic Peninsula, where there's incredible krill abundance. So all the whales in the southern hemisphere will be around the Antarctic continent during their summer, and they can pack on enough food in 5 months, 6 months there in Antarctica to sustain them throughout their wintering period in the tropics. And in the northern hemisphere, there's kind of a break between the Atlantic humpback whales and the Pacific humpback whales. In the Pacific, where we are, they'll winter in Hawaii and generally, and along the coast of Mexico, Costa Rica, and in Japan. And then come summertime, they're all going up to Southeast Alaska, where we saw that first slide of the bubble net feeding and all the humpback whales coming up in the bubble net. So there's a lot of movement in the ocean. Animals are in certain areas at certain times because there's more food. So that's an important understanding, is the patchiness of the food distribution in the ocean. I want to start with the humpback whales because they're known for their songs, and actually I'll play some songs. This is from the original recording that was actually made by a naval engineer. Some of the earliest recordings were found through hydrophone recordings after the Second or during the Second World War, when they were trying to find submarines. and they'd find these sounds that eventually they understood were being made by animals, and specifically whales and dolphins. And so this engineer eventually showed a couple biologists that subsequently became champions for whales, Roger Payne and his wife, Katie Payne. And they took the recordings that Frank Watlington, the naval engineer, provided them and made a CD called Songs of the Humpback Whale, which was the first time that the public was able to hear these songs and then realize how majestic these animals were. And that instead of intensively hunting them to the brink of extinction, it was time to think about a different relationship to have with whales and dolphins. And that led to some of the early bans on whaling. So this was an incredible feat of conservation that was done through sounds, specifically the sounds of the humpback whales. So I'll play part of that recording that was made in the 1970s, put together by Frank Watlington and championed by Roger and Katie Payne. Is this too loud? So these songs are made by the males only. Unlike birds, where most of the time it's just the males, but quite often, especially in the tropics, the female birds will be singing. We have some birds in our area that'll sing. Some of our owls will sing, the females. But for the humpback whales, this is all the males that are singing. In this case, this is a mother with her calf, and this is a male escort. And when you're in the water with humpback whales and there's a male escort and it's singing, this is exactly what you hear without any kind of amplification. I mean, it's just a strong signal, and you can feel it in your bones depending on how close you are to the whale. And these songs are very organized and structured. So they have themes that are made of phrases and units, and they'll sing theme A with the phrases and units of theme A. They'll go to theme B, theme C, theme D, theme E, and then go back to theme A and start all the way through again. So I'll explain a little bit about the recent finds about humpback songs, but I want to go to the other sounds that the humpback whales make as well. And here's a humpback whale breaching. And for any whale and dolphin, if they want to be acrobatic and breach out of the water and go head first without making a splash, they're totally capable of doing it. But this isn't what they're trying to do. They're trying to make the loudest splash that they can. So when they breach out of the water, they're trying to do a big cannonball with their body. And that's one of the ways that they can project information about size of the males and strength of the males. And of course, the humpback bubble feeding system is another example where in that first picture that I showed at the beginning of the presentation, you had 15 humpback whales that were emerging from the bubble net in one synchronized unit. And this is incredible precision. And they do this all day long in the waters of Southeast Alaska, where the food that they have is so abundant. And they have duties. Each of the whales has a duty within the bubble net hunting strategy, and they all come up in the same position, so there's no confusion about how to maximize the amount of mouths that are coming up within the bubble net to capture their food. And the sounds of the bubbles are one of the things that drives the prey to be clustered into a tighter ball that the humpback whales come in between. So there's been a wonderful study that just came out in the last few years that showed how humpback whale songs evolve. Because generally, the humpback whales will sing the same song. It'll be slightly changing over time when they're in their wintering area, and then they'll kind of stop the song development. They'll go down to their summer feeding area, and when they come back to the winter area, they pick up the song exactly where it was when they left it. So this particular slide shows the study where they were able to sample the humpback whale songs in each of these locations, which is 4,000 miles between East Australia, and in an easterly direction it goes eventually to French Polynesia, 4,000 miles. So you can see that what they were able to find is that they could see the different songs were mostly coming from Eastern Australia and then starting to go further east over successive years until it finally reached the farthest east point. And in one case, they actually had a whale that took a song that had moved from Eastern Australia over the years to French Polynesia, and it went around Cape Horn in South America, and it was in the Atlantic. So this is an example, one of the best examples, that humans aren't the only animal to have culture. When you think about change in animals, including humans, we can change through our genetic makeup. We are changed by the environment that we're in. And culture is the latest agent of change. And with humans, we've been able to do amazing things through our cultural development. But we're not the only ones, and humpback whales and their song are one of the best examples of change within the lifetime of a single animal that gets moved from one area to the next. And we have blue whales, which generally, unless you're in an area with really high productivity, blue whales tend to be by themselves. They're the largest animal that's ever lived on our planet. Here we have a blue whale mother with her calf. And people thought, well, blue whales, they don't gather in big groups, but I think our understanding of what blue whales are doing is changing based on the understanding that blue whales have the lowest sound, their sound production is the lowest sound production on the planet. They can make sounds, obviously, in the infrasonic range that we can't hear, but if we were next to a blue whale when it had 180 decibels of infrasonic sound that we couldn't hear, our body would just be rocking. And consequently, because of its large size, the sounds are low, and low sounds travel the farthest in the ocean. So there's an understanding that some of these blue whale songs can go across 1,000 miles and more and be heard by other whales. So instead of the concept of blue whales being isolated in this big expanse of an ocean basin, they're actually in communication with the other whales through sound. And unfortunately, our impact on the soundscapes of the ocean, our human impact, is making significant changes in what the whales are able to hear, based on things like our engine noise from boats, our sonar used for drilling, and other frequency noises. So we're changing the environments for blue whales, so that capacity to hear across an entire ocean basin may be at risk. And these down here are sperm whales. And they look like, oh my goodness, they're not streamlined, they don't have that graceful blue whale look, or or a dolphin look, but what we're looking at is the largest sound-producing organ of any animal on the planet. And what sperm whales in this area here, it's about 30% of their body is their sound-producing organ, which produces clicks, directional clicks. So inside the head of sperm whales, there's a lot of highly refined oil, there's muscle, and there's a lot of connected air sacs. And so the sperm whale is able to take sounds, from where they generate, they get the air from their blowhole. It'll move through the air sacs and go through all these interconnected networks and come out the very front as a very targeted sonar system. And they're relying on echolocation clicks. So they'll be, and it's just a really simple click. It's click, 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 and as they dive, they'll go diving down up to 4,000 feet deep to get squid in the darkness, with the exception of bioluminescence that's available down at the depths. So they're going down, and you can listen to them, and it goes click, click. And as they get closer to their prey, it goes click, 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 because the time interval, they're waiting. These clicks are really short. For echolocation and for sonar, you want short, very directional clicks, because you're listening for the echo to come back, and that's going to give you information on distance to your prey, the shape of the prey, what direction the prey is going, the orientation of the prey. All of those things you can tease out through echolocation clicks. So as the sperm whale is getting closer to the squid, it will go click, 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 really this buzz of clicks, and then silence, and that's when it's got the squid. And so these sperm whales live in matrilineal groups, meaning they're groups that stay with the mother. And so we'll have the matriarch and her offspring, her daughters and calves. There may be 4 generations that are in a clan of sperm whales. And when they're at the surface, they'll share codas. That'll be not as focused as the clicks, not as loud as the clicks. They're more of a social cohesion sound that they give that's specific to the clan. There may be another clan a mile over that has a completely different coda structure, and never the two will cross. They maintain their coda structure for their specific matrilineal clan. So another thing that they do is they'll be at the surface, and if they all go down as a group, if they have young, they'll leave babysitters on top with the calves, whether it's the daughters or the matriarch. So they'll kind of reunite at the surface and exchange codas and move along as the group. And it's just a wonderful society of sperm whales. And now we're going to deal with the orcas. And we're really fortunate here to be living so close to one of the longest studies of killer whales that we have in science, because there's been 35 years of study on killer whales in Puget Sound and off Vancouver Island and up in southeast Alaska. And what they found is that there's different killer whale ecotypes. So there's what's known as a resident killer whale, which is, these are southern residents in Puget Sound. And the residents focus on eating fish. Specifically, they like Chinook salmon. That's the top of the line for these orcas. And then there's transients that they live on seals and sea lions. And then there's offshore ecotype killer whales that feed on sharks and large fish, but they're offshore. So they have the capacity to interbreed, but they don't, because their behavior, which is specifically tied to a certain way that they gather food keeps them separate. And also, they have completely different sound systems, or sound dialects. And they operate differently in terms of if the resident killer whales make a lot of vocalizations because they're trying to catch salmon, which doesn't have as good a hearing as the transients food, which is the seals and sea lions. So the residents are making a lot of noise in their feedings. The transients are quiet. And because they know that their seals and sea lions are listening for the transient vocalizations. And when the seals and sea lions hear the transient killer whales, they scamper out on rocks and head to safe areas that the killer whales can't get to them. On the other hand, if those seals and sea lions hear a resident killer whale, it ignores it. So it's a very tight ecosystem, and these dialects are specific to the different orca clans. I know there's a lot of terminology, but orcas have their matrilineal. The offspring will stay with the mother throughout their entire lives. And so a number of matrilines will meet and form pods. A number of pods will gather into clans, and then a number of clans will gather into a community. And so we have the southern community of Puget Sound and southern Vancouver Island. We have the community of North Vancouver Island, and we have the community of Southeast Alaska. And we know all of their identity down to each pod member. It's that specific on the information that's been able to be gathered about killer whales. And killer whales, they are the apex predator in the ocean. They'll take on gray whales, they'll take on sperm whale calves, and blue whale calves. They are the animal that everybody fears. And predation is one factor that's really led to societies developing. It probably led to human societies gathering together for defense against the surrounding predators. For sure, it's the case with the other animals in the ocean aside from the killer whales.